One of the movements of Chassidus that's very distinct and very, very famous is Kotzk. Kotzk Chassidus was Reb Mendele Kotzker. I don't know if you could say that all of Kotzk was one person. There was a continuation after him. But there was something very unique about Kotzk during the lifetime of Reb Mendele Kotzker, which made it distinct even from what would continue through the disciples of Reb Mendele Kotzker, the Kotzker Rebbe, and the generations after him. I'm not an expert on Chassidus Kotzk. I don't know their history. I don't understand everything about their philosophy. But from the little bit that I know, I understand that Kotzk was a Chassidus for special people, not for the faint of heart. An ordinary person, an average person who would have joined Chassidus Kotzk would have had a nervous breakdown in a very short time. The essence of Chassidus Kotzk was serving Hashem with absolute emes, midas emes. There was an enormous amount of bittul hayesh. The culture of that community involved a lot of, I don't know if you want to call it self-effacement, but certainly not prioritizing one's attributes at all, but instead to focus exclusively on emes, on the serving of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And the Kotzker Rebbe had a following of many, many Talmidim who were great people. They probably were tzaddikim, they were balei madrege. And they were also chrifim. They had incredible minds, unbelievable minds. They were go'inim, and they were masmidim, and they were chassidim, and they were tzaddikim. There was a period of years where the Kotzker Rebbe isolated himself. This is just an example. And one of his Talmidim was the first Gerer Rebbe, the Chiddushei Rim. His becoming a Talmud of the Kotzker Rebbe is a story unto itself, but he was a disciple of the Kotzker. So he had written a chibur, a commentary on the Shulchan Aruch. I think an Albert Shulchan Aruch. And the Kotzker Rebbe was in isolation, so he either slid it under the door or he sent it into him through somebody who had access to him. And then he later heard through the door the Kotzker Rebbe responding by saying, "Itche Maye, Loi dein Kopos, die kennt besser schreiben." Based on the mind that God gave you, you could have written a better commentary. This is a typical example of the directness and the midas emes of Kotzk. And there are many stories. I've shared a few of the stories that I know. And like I said, I am not an expert. I have not studied it, but it's famous. It's very unusual. The Kotzker Rebbe and the Tzemach Tzedek never met. They were contemporaries. They passed away almost at the same time. The Tzemach Tzedek passed away in Tov Reish Chavav, 1866. I think the Kotzker passed away in Tov Reish Chav Daled, 1864, but I'm not sure. And they both have the same name. So I heard that the Kotzker had a taina to the Tzemach Tzedek, had a complaint to the Rebbe of the Tzemach Tzedek. The complaint was, a ganze Woche sitzt und lernt, und Shabbos kommt praven. The Kotzker Rebbe used to refer to the Tzemach Tzedek as Mendel Lubavitcher. That was the name that he employed to identify the Rebbe of the Tzemach Tzedek. He says, Mendel Lubavitcher, a ganze Woche sitzt und lernt, and Shabbos will kommen praven. A whole week is learning Torah, like a Lamden, like an Olam Misher. Shabbos, he wants to be a Rebbe. And his point, of course, was, if you're going to be a Rebbe and you're going to be involved in Avodas Hashem and Dveikos, it's got to be a full-time occupation. You can't learn Torah like a Rosh Hashiva for 6 days, and then Shabbos willst du praven. This was his comment. And the Tzemach Tzedek's comment about the Kotzker, which I think is printed, although I think I heard this rather than read it, what the Tzemach Tzedek said about the Kotzker Rebbe, das HaSeder von Lefnei Matan Torah. That the kind of Chassidus he created was the way things were before the Torah was given. This is the observation, this is the comment, this is the criticism, if you will, that Tzemach Tzedek had levied against the Chassidus of Kotzk. The meaning of this statement, like Lifnei Matan Torah, is that it was very extreme, very polar. That the midas ha'emes, the pursuit of emes, was done in the kind of way that left no room for the reality of the world. It was either you have a relationship with Hashem, or you live in the world. You cannot have both together, which is the the classic understanding of life before the Torah was given. The Torah breaks decrees, it fuses opposites, that you could be a servant of Hashem and, in quotes, live in this world, end quote. So that Tzemach Tzedek observed that the Kotzker Given HaSeder from the name Tzemach Tzedek objected. He didn't agree with the Chassidishe of the Kotzker Rebbe because he felt that it was like Lifnei Matan Torah. This isn't to say Chas v'Shalom that what the Kotzker Rebbe did wasn't holy, it wasn't the service of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. It was simply that it was Leila Teyu Bara L'Sheves Yitzhara, the world was created for us to inhabit and to live. And that Tzemach Tzedek felt that in the Kotzker's derech, you didn't have that inyan. I believe that I've already told you the story of the Tolkei Chassidim. I'm sitting here thinking to myself that, there's an old expression that how often can you repeat the same joke? How often can you repeat the same story? And how often can you repeat the same Dvar Torah? So the joke, of course, goes is that the story makes sure not to repeat more than once a year. A joke, you should make sure not to repeat more than once every 2 years. A Dvar Torah, you're allowed to say twice in the same speech because no one's paying attention. We've been doing this for 5 or 6 years. And I actually do not, as a rule, make up stories. So I have to deal with the stories that I have from my sources. So I'm sort of reaching a point where I'm going to have to repeat stories that I've told you in the past. And I believe this story I've already told you, but it's been a while. And it's very relevant, so I'm going to tell you this story as well. In the Teres Sholem, in the Sichas of the Rebbe Rashab, there's also footnotes from the Rebbe, and there's now published letters from the previous Rebbe that tells this story at length. There's a concept, there's a phenomenon, there's a historic idea called Tolkei Chassidus, Tolk. Tolk is Rosh Tevis, the letters, Tolk is spelled Tov Lamed Kuf. Tolkei Chassidus. And there's an old Yiddish expression by Chassidim, Talak is nicht kein Tolk. Talak is nicht kein Tolk. The key to understanding this phrase is to understand that Talak is spelled Tov Lamed Kuf, like Tolk. And the Talak is nicht kein Tolk is spelled Tes Aleph Lamed Kuf. Tolk with a Tes is a Yiddish word. That means an order. A completed and organized system. So it's an old expression. By Chassidim, Talak is nicht kein Tolk. That the idea of talak, which I'm going to explain momentarily, is not an order. It's not correct. What's the story of talak? The story basically is that Avram Kaliskir was a Talmud of the Holy Maggid and a contemporary of the Alter Rebbe's, and he lived in Litte. He lived in the part of Eastern Europe where the Misnagdim had their greatest yeshivas and their greatest influence and their greatest stronghold. And people who were involved in Chassidus, in Litte, in Reisin, in Litte, had to be, of course they were challenged more, they suffered more, but they also had to be much more careful about how they behaved. They shouldn't be chas v'shalom, the opposite of a Kiddush Hashem. So Avram Kaliske, the previous Rebbe describes it in a letter and so on, gathered around himself a collection of Talmidim who were incredibly bright, very sharp, and he created with them what could be called perhaps a Kotzker type Chassidus, very, very extreme. And the members of this group did all kinds of things that were crazy and abnormal, particularly in embarrassing themselves, in self-effacing themselves. And the end of the story was that one of these Tolkei Chassidim, one of these very extreme fellows, came to a Olam Shesed, to a city of Misnagdim, and he got permission to speak at the largest Beis HaMedrash because of his great scholarship. And he spoke out against the Vilna Gaon. He made fun of the Vilna Gaon, the Gra. The consequence of this was there was a Chedim and Tov Kuf Lamed. In 1770 there was a ban made against Chassidim based on this. The Mezritcher Maggid was so upset that there's actually a letter where the Alter Rebbe describes how Avram Kaliske was afraid to come into the city of Mezrich out of fear of the Kpeda of the Mezritcher Maggid. And the Alter Rebbe and Mendel HaRadoker had to go to the Mezritcher Maggid and beg him to forgive him. Because the Chilul Hashem, the backlash for this story was very, very, very severe. So there's an old expression, to be an extremist, to be a radical, even if you feel justified in your radicalism, it's nicht kein Talk. It's not an order, and the Eibishter wants there to be a world and for us to fill it with Yiddishkeit, and you don't do that by being extreme. There's actually a word in Teirah Shalom, a very interesting word, where the Rebbe Rashab is talking about the Tanya. The Tanya was printed and written in Tavkuf Nun Gimel and Tavkuf Nun Dal, and it was printed, of course, at the end of Tavkuf Nun Vav, Tavkuf Nun Zayin. That means 1796. And the Rebbe Rashab once observed that even though the Tanya was written and printed before Peterburg, before the Alter Rebbe was released from prison, it's written in a signet, it's written in a style of Chochmah, Bina, Vadas, of full understanding and knowledge and wisdom, like after Peterburg. So the Rebbe Rashab says in a Sikha that it's a miracle that Tanya was written in Tavkuf Nun Zayin. Oib chas v'sholem. And then he says, parenthetically, Memegov them sagen chas v'sholem. If God forbid, then he says parenthetically, you're allowed to say about this, God forbid, end of parenthesis. The Tanya had been written in Tavkuf Lamed Zayin in 1776 and 1777 rather than 1796, 1997. Voltas gebrennt Welt, it would destroy the world. It would be forceful in a way that would be destructive as opposed to becoming unified with the person who's affected by the Tanya. Und das ist nicht der Kavanah. It's not why the Eibishter made the world. In short, there's a phenomena of Taihu, extremism, represented by the Kotzker, represented by the Chassidishe Talak, which is not the Kavanah. The Kavanah is that there should be a world, we should serve Hashem within its parameters, and so on. And I remember when I discussed this idea with you, I told you several additional stories which I'm not going to repeat. And one of the points which I mentioned to you was the story of Rabbi Chaim Ber Vilensky, Chaim Ber. There was a concept called Kremenchuger Beralach. A number of Chassidim, 3 or 4, who all of them came from Kremenchuk. They were big Lomdim, big Maskilim, Greisa Charifim. Talmidim of Rabbi Yosef Tamarkin. Rabbi Yosef Tamarkin passed away in the early 1870s, suddenly and at a young age, and created a huge vacuum in the city of Kremenchuk where he lived. That a Marash saw to it that the Rabbanah should go over to his son-in-law. But there was also the Chassidus in Kremenchuk. There were a whole many Lubavitcher Chassidim. So the Rabbanos of Rabbi Yosef Tamarkin went to his son-in-law. But the responsibility to the Chassidim went over to these Beralach. And one of them was the Moshe Ber Masayev. That was Moshe Ber from the city of Masayev. He was an extremist, and he was a big chassid, but he wanted people to be extreme. And extreme meant neglecting their family, neglecting their lives, drinking too much alcohol, all kinds of things that he felt would destroy their ego so that the chassidus could emerge. Rabbi Chaim Ber was his dear friend. Rabbi Chaim Ber was younger than him. But Rabbi Chaim Ber was so upset, he so disagreed with this radicalism, with this polarity, with this extremism, that he opened a separate minyan. And he had his own following who were learning Chassidus in a more meyushavdik, in a more normal way. So Moshe Ber Masayev was very angry at his former friend for competing with him. And he never really forgave him. Rabbi Chaim Ber, who separated from his former friend, when people came to him and asked him to do them favors, he would say, I'll do you a favor on a condition. And the condition is that you do a favor for this Rabbi Moshe Ber. In other words, he separated from him, he disagreed with him, but he respected him and he loved him, and it bothered him that he had to do this, but he felt like if he wouldn't do this, Kremenchuk Chassidus would fall apart. The end of the story is that Rabbi Chaim Ber died young, passed away very young. It was in his early 50s, I think. And Rabbi Moshe Ber Masayev, who was older, would live on. So when Rabbi Chaim Ber died, passed away, Rabbi Moshe Ber Masayev said, it's a pity, I should have died and he should have lived. If he would have lived, the world would have had a pleasure from him. Meaning to say, at the end of his life, he recognized the mistake of chaos, of extreme, even if it's extreme religiosity. So the previous Rebbe has a note, or a letter, or a sikha, where he says, it's a quote from the earlier Rabbeim, Fun Chaim Ber Hebtzachon Tikn. That with this chassid Chaim Ber, order begins. The Beralach before him, the Moshe Bet, and the others were very wild and extreme people. The Eibishter needs order. The Eibishter needs a world. Now, another way of describing the interface between being devout and extreme in your Avodas Hashem and there being a world is Ratzei Vashev. Ratzei means you're running towards Hashem, Vashev means you're living in this world. It's the interface, it's the meeting of both. Ratzei and Shev that creates that there is a world. As brennt nicht Welt, as fillt Welt. It doesn't burn and destroy the world, it infuses the world, it illuminates the world, it warms the world. And this is why the Eibishter made the world, that there should be this balance of Ratzei Vashev. Or in the words of the Gemara, which of course Chassidus explains so much, Nichnas b'shalom v'yotza b'shalom, Bat Rabbi Akiva. He went in peace and he came out in peace. So the Rebbe says the only reason he was able to come out from the Merkava in peace is because he went in knowing that he needs to come out. In other words, in the Ratzei there's the Shuv, and the Shuv there's the Ratzei. Not only is there order and normalcy because there's a balance between running to Hashem and living in this world, but Ba'al Korcha Chata Chai, Ba'al Korcha Chata Meis, in running to Hashem there's a sense of I need to live in this world, and in living in this world there's a sense of I want to run to Hashem, and the truth lies in the middle, in the place of tension. And that's the meaning of Ratzei Vashev. And if you think about it, to be extreme, one extreme which is very spiritual, or another extreme which is very material, is easier than this. Bechlal extremes are easy. That's why human nature is that people go towards extremes. It's a fact of life. Being balanced, being in the middle, being not too soft and not too firm, but in the middle, not too acidic and not too alkaline, to use a chemical example, is the most difficult thing of all. And that's the purpose. The purpose is Ratzei Vashev, not just bringing Hashem into this world, but a balance between bringing Hashem into this world and connecting to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And the place of this balance is very, very difficult to attain and to maintain and to achieve and so forth. Why am I telling you this entire Inyan? I'm telling you this entire Inyan because if you study the Chumash, as explained of course in Chassidus and the Rebbe's teachings, the various different stories in the Torah, whatever they happen to be, the story of the Meraglim, the story of Kerach, and other stories like that, Chassidus frequently explains that what they were lacking was Ratzei Vashev. What they were lacking was the balance between connecting to HaKadosh Baruch Hu and living in this world. The Meraglim wanted to say Ratzei, there should be no Shuv. Kairach is tricky. There's an argument that he wanted Shuv and no Ratzei, Kulam Kedoshim. But when you learn the stories of the Chumash, you can summarize those stories based on this principle that health, success, the purpose of the Eibishter is an interface, is a meeting of Ratzei Vashev. Yet, even though the purpose of the Torah to be practiced correctly is a meeting of Ratzei Vashev, in the midbar this was incomplete. If you learn the Chumash, with some of the Rishonim, some of the commentaries, you find that the Jewish people in the midbar didn't do all mitzvahs. There were things they didn't do at all. Like we had recently in the Chumash, there was only one Korban Pesach brought all 40 years in the desert. There are many mitzvahs, ma'asos they did not do. Because although living in the midbar was after the Torah was given, the full manifestation of Ratzei Vashev, the full realization of this fusion between running to Hashem and bringing Hashem into this world, and how in the running to Hashem you could feel being in the world, and in being in the world you could feel running to Hashem and so forth, didn't begin until they came into Eretz Yisrael. I'm going to give you a number of examples. Now, not everything I'm going to say right now was written in Sfarim. These are ideas that I've sort of accrued. In the midbar, you were not allowed to eat basar taiva. In the desert, if you wanted to eat meat, it had to be a korban, to sacrifice it to Hashem. Even if you only sacrificed the emid and you ate the meat, a shlamim, it had to be a korban. If you wanted to eat meat and it wasn't a korban, you're not allowed to shecht it. And according to the Rambam, you didn't shecht it, but you were allowed to eat it through a process which is called nechira, which is now not allowed. So in the midbar, a person was not allowed to eat meat, kosher. He was allowed to eat meat in what we would call today a certain case of not kosher, but to eat meat kosher had to be a korban. Couldn't be any other way. Because eating meat has to do with living in this world and having pleasure from this world. In the desert, there was no such concept. And like I said before, there are other examples for this as well. The example which is relevant to us, which is the discussion of our Maamar, is that the Ramban writes, Takya in Parshas Shlach, that when the Jewish people were in the Midbar, there was no Nesachim. The Jewish people in the Midbar brought karbanos, but they did not bring the wine and the olive oil and the flour that went along with it. These mitzvahs did not begin until they came into Eretz Yisrael. And the reason is, because as you'll see in this Maamar, karbones and Nesachim constitute Ratzei V'Shev. So karbones they had, which is Ratzu, and the Nesachim they didn't have because this is Shuv. As I mentioned before, there were things that the Jewish people did not do in the Midbar that would not begin until they came into Eretz Yisrael, because life in the Midbar was Yiddishkeit in a way that was incomplete. One of the best examples for this, if you will, Ratzai B'li Sheiv, a Yiddishkeit which is one pole and lacks balance, is Nesachim, is the libations. That when you brought a korban, in addition to bringing the korban, you had to pour the wine on the mizbeach, you had to have oil, you had to have flour, you had to have wine, and so forth. Rashi says that right after the story with the Meraglim, that they found that they were going to spend 40 years in the desert, immediately Hashem says, when you come into Eretz Yisrael, you should add these details to the korban. And of course Rashi says that this is giving the Jewish people hope that they're one day going to make it into the Holy Land. The Ramban writes that in the Mizbah there was no Nesachim. In the Midbar they had karbonos, they had offerings, but they did not have Nesachim, the libations, the wine and the flour and the oil that went along with the karbonos was not brought in the Midbar. And this Maamar that we're about to learn addresses Nesachim, it addresses what these things were, and in effect explains why. Why was it that in the Midbar there would be no Nesachim, and only once the Jewish people went into Yisrael would there be of Nesachim? And the answer is because the oil and the flour and the wine that went along with the korban is the shave of the Ratzei. The korban itself is a sacrifice, and the Ratzei of running to Hashem and sacrificing. But along with the sacrifice you had to bring something back, which is the balance between Ratzei and shave, where the truth is in the combination, is in the joining together of Ratzei and shave. In the Midbar they didn't have this. In the Midbar they had just the korban, they didn't have the nesach, because the avoid of the Jewish people in the Midbar was one extreme, it lacked balance. In other words, just like practically, when the Jewish people went into the Holy Land, they would have to become agriculturalists and become farmers, which would constitute going away from being holy and being directly involved with Hashem to make this world a home for HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Spiritually as well, in their service of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, in the desert there was a Ratzei without a shave, there was one pole, there wasn't a balance. Going into Yisrael would create the balance between Ratzei and shave on a spiritual level as well. Our Maamar, amongst many, is going to explain this. There's many Maamarim that begin Lahav Einyan Hanesachim. Our Maamar begins just plain Einyan Hanesachim. The idea that when they brought a korban, along with the korban came a nesach, and you'll see in Hashem as this class and Bli Neder, the next class unfold, we're going to be exploring the interface, the relationship between the korban and the nesachim. And on the one hand, we're going to indicate, we're going to reveal, we're going to share what they have in common. And on the other hand, we're going to point out the difference. That the idea of the korban is ratzah, the idea of the nesachim is shave. So this introduction is setting up this Maamar, which is for us really the first time we're touching on this very, very, very fundamental discussion in Chassidus, how in the Midbar, although it was after the Torah was given and they were doing physical mitzvahs, the full idea of Ratzei V'Shev was not yet fully manifest. And one of the symptoms of this was that there was no Nesachim in the Midbar. The Ramban, I believe, also who says that in the Midbar there was no korban musaf. And although it doesn't say this explicitly, but I believe that there's a similarity to this notion that in the Midbar they didn't have the shuv, they only had the ratzo, and somehow the musaf represents that. I don't really have a source for this. This is just a thought that I have. But let's begin the Maamar. Line 1. Einyan Hanesachim. We're going to be exploring the significance that when the Jewish people go into Eretz Yisrael, many karbanos, not all, but many, was not only the sacrifice of an animal in part or in total, completely, but it also involved a nesach. So the Rabbi says on line 3, Ksiv, Parshas Tzav. It says in Parshas Tzav, Im hei achel, yei achel, mi besar zevach shlama v'goyim. That one of the karbanos brought in the Beis HaMikdash, of course, was the karban shlomim, a peace offering. And of course, one of the reasons the karban shlomim is called a peace offering, because it made peace in the world. Part of it was eaten by the owner of the animal, the bailim, the host. Part of the animal was eaten by the kohen and by the priests, and part of it was eaten by the mizbeach. V'yamar Razal, so it says in Chazal, b'shtei achilas hakosim adab. But this double expression, hey achel, yei achel, teaches us that when a karban was offered, there were two consumers of the karban. One of them was achilas adam, the person who ate the karban, in this case the kohen and the Yisrael, and the other, of course, was v'achas achilas mizbeach, was the eating of the mizbeach of the karban. Now, to be sure, our Maamar is not really going to be exploring so much this concept of shtei achilas. Our Maamar is not going to be discussing the idea of achilas adam and achilas mizbeach. There are other Maamarim Chassidus that explain this, including in Likutei Torah. And of course, what's ironic is when you learn the Maamarim that explain achilas adam and achilas mizbeach, the thing that's so incredible is that achilas adam is considered higher than achilas mizbeach. The eating of the mizbeach is a lower level, and the eating of adam, practically meaning the kohen who ate the karban, is considered a higher madreg, because the mizbeach is considered malchus. The adam, the kohen who eats, is on behalf of adam ha'elyon, which is higher than malchus, and achilas adam is higher than achilas mizbeach. Our Maamar is not going to be exploring the two levels of achilas mizbeach and achilas adam. So the Alter Rebbe is not going to discuss it. Why bring it? Because there's one thing that this pasuk and Chazal does indicate: the idea that the mizbeach eating karbanos was called achila. There are many indications in psukim and in Chazal that the karbanos were Hashem's food, Hashem's nourishment. But this Maamar Chazal, based on this pasuk, says explicitly, says straight, that a karban was food, achila. So the Rebbe says on line 6, "V'tzorech lahav inyan hakarbanos." It's necessary for us to understand the concept of a sacrifice. They would offer up, they would bring close, they would sacrifice on an altar from the cattle, from the sheep, and from the goats, and so on. And the fact that when it was consumed, it was called eating. Obviously, when a person eats, it's called achila, because it nourishes the person. The food is broken down, it becomes one with the person becomes one with the food. But when meat is put on a mizbeach, on an altar, on a slab of stone, and burnt into ash, how could you call that achila? What kind of nourishment, what kind of food is it providing? So why is it called achila? It says in other psukim, and here the Rebbe brings the more typical psukim, lachem isha ladeshem, and then it says, of course, lachmi liishai v'gemer. And there's a whole discussion in Chassidus and many Maamarim about the concept of lachmi liishai, that according to some, liishai means the malachim, but according to Chassidus, liishai means the Eibishter himself, that Hashem is nourished from the karbanos to the extent that karbanos are considered food. So the question is, what does it mean Hashem is being fed? What does it mean Hashem needs food? That's the first question. The second question is Einyan Hanesachim. The concept of the nesach, which is literally, translation is a libation, the pouring of wine. But as I mentioned before, and you will get to the Mitzvah Hashem next week, the nesach included not just wine, but also flour and oil, the combination of the wine and the flour and the oil. And of course, as you all know by now, I'm very, very good at suspense. I don't keep it at all, so I'll tell it to you now. Oil is chokhmah, and wine is bina, and flour is das, chabad. The combination of this oil and wine and flour together are called in halacha nesachim, but specifically nesach is a reference to the wine. They would pour wine on the mizbeach, v'yeded l'shit. It went down. There were these little holes that the wine was poured down through, and then it would go down under the Mizbeach, and it would go out of the Beis Hamikdash through some kind of a drainage system. And that's the meaning. We had Vishitna, which went under the ground. That these little holes, these little nostrils, if you will, where the wine was poured down, will go down all the way into the abyss, to the bottom of the earth. Says the Rebbe Asheru, the fact that in addition to a korban, which was burnt on the Mizbeach, there was a nesach, that although the nesach consists of oil and flour as well as wine, but the word nesach is most directly associated with wine, Ashehu l'cheire pele, that the idea of this nesach, and specifically the wine, is wondrous, because it's heipech hakorban. It's the exact opposite of what a korban is. Why? What is a korban b'chinas ha'alah? You're taking an animal, you're raising it up. You took a cow or a sheep, which is b'chinas chai, which is an animal. You removed its life. And and by removing the life of the animal, the Rebbe says immediately that life didn't disappear, it immediately went upwards. And v'gam eter onon hakorban eila l'mayla. And the smoke of the korban, which was consumed on the Mizbeach, also ascended upwards. And this word eter, ayin, taf reish, it's in the Likutei Torah in the original. I don't know what it means, but if you look in the dictionary, look in Targum, the translation of the word eter constitutes a prayer, it constitutes a petition. When you want something, one of the many words for prayer is atira, is reaching out. So eter hakorban perhaps means how the smoke of the korban was calling out towards HaKadosh Baruch Hu. So the animal's life, which was taken from him before he was made into a korban, went immediately heavenward. And then other parts of the animal, and in some cases all of the animal, were put on the Mizbeach and burned, and again the smoke went up to the heavens. The libation was made from a plant as opposed to from an animal. But the purpose and the direction was it was caused to descend into the abyss. And again, the thing that's complicated here is that the flour, the oil were actually burned on the Mizbeach, but they're considered part of the nesach, that the concept of the nesach is to pour into the tohim. And the last question is, why were the libations that they poured on the Mizbeach, they went down into the abyss, wine? V'gam, one final question. A korban did not give full nachas ruach to HaKadosh Baruch Hu unless, along with the animal which was burnt on the Mizbeach, you had the libation. It says in the Gemara, if a person reads Shema and then he doesn't put on tefillin, it's kezevach b'lei nesachim, kemincha b'lei nesach, kezevach b'lei nesachim, and kemincha b'lei nesach. I think I'm not quoting the Maamar Chazal correctly. The Alter Rebbe just brings the word kezevach b'lei nesach. If you read Kirishma and you don't put on tefillin with the reading of the Shema, it's like bringing a korban, a sacrifice, without the nesach. Now I'm going to say this right now, because again, this point is not going to be explored in our Maamar in great detail, although it's going to be mentioned. Tefillin, and I'll tell you about Chassidishe Parsha. In Temchapimim, there was a mashpia, his name was Reb Greinim. And he was the mashpia b'hei hayediyah. He really was the greatest influence on the Talmidim in Temchapimim. No mashpia represents the success of Temchapimim more completely than this person, because so many of his Talmidim were the mashpiim of the next generations. And Reb Greinim was a great man in many, many ways. And Reb Greinim, one of the distinctions of Reb Greinim was he was a moeden dike bal shmua. Besides for all the chassidus that he knew and the Shamayim, and it said he was always involved in tzedakah. He was an incredible transmitter of what we call the shemusha shel Torah, of Asarum Chassidus is. the story and the history and the spirit that is around Chassidus. So Rabbi Greinem once said the following: the Alter Rebbe has a nigun, which is not really a nigun. It's called a tnua. We know that the Alter Rebbe has 10 nigunim. It's traditional that the Rebbe Rashab said, going back all the way from generation to generation, the Alter Rebbe had eingeführt by Chassidim Inyan Hanegine. The Alter Rebbe considered music, singing, very important in Chassidus. And the Alter Rebbe composed 10 nigunim. There's a big question what the 10 nigunim are. There's more than 10. It's very hard to know exactly what they are. One of the interesting, more recent controversies is that the Rebbe taught a nigun Samalach Nafshi in 1954 and called it a nigun of the Alter Rebbe. No one knew that this was a nigun of the Alter Rebbe, and of course it offset the whole question of what the 10 nigunim are. But the 10 nigunim of the Alter Rebbe are not all nigunim. There's different types. And one of the categories of the nigunim of the Alter Rebbe is a tnua. It's not a nigun, it's a musical statement. There's Enorena, there's Likra Shabbos, and there's Kayal Tarek. These are not complete nigunim, they're not whole songs, they're melodic statements. They're a melody that's one stanza that says something. And one of these nigunim is very, very short. Ka'ayol Tarek alafike moyim v'hoyu l'tetafes beinenechot. Ka'ayol Tarek alafike moyim v'hoyu l'tetafes beinenechot. That's the whole tnua. And of course the question is, what's the connection between Ka'ayol Tarek alafike moyim and v'hoyu l'tetafes beinenechot? Ka'al Tarek Afika Mayim is a ram jumping over the hills. V'hayu l'tetafes beinenechot is film. So the Greinem said that this is Ratzi v'Shev. Ka'al Tarek Afika Mayim, this is Ratzi, running away from the world. The way Chassidus explains what a ayol is and what harim are, that it goes on Seviv Kalam, and like you have Maamar Pesach and so on. And v'hayu l'tetafes beinenechot shuv. Tefillin represents Shoiv. It comes from the mind to the heart. The Ritzuis that run down are bringing it down at the tabor to even lower. Krishma is Mesiras Nefesh. So this is what it says in the Gemara, Krishma b'lei tefillin. You say Shema, which is the name for Mesiras Nefesh. But you don't put on tefillin, it's Ratzi without shave. And it's the same idea as a korban without a nesach, which is a Ratzi without a shave. And it's incomplete. So the Rebbe wants to understand why this is. V'gam, in addition, we want to understand Sha'korban, I'm reading again line 15, Ein el reich nechayach. A korban does not give a complete pleasure to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Now, if you understand Hebrew, you know that the word nechayach means to rest, right? It says in Chassidus, reich nechayach isha la'Hashem, nechayach is to descend. The korban does not have the effect of coming back into this world, Einyan Hanesachim, unless it comes along with a libation. Kamar Zal the Gemara says, Kol hakeder Krishma b'lei tefillin, kizev b'lei nesachim. So we want to understand all of these things. So the first question is, the big question of Maamar is, what's a korban? Why would a korban be called food? Why, in addition to the korban, do you have to have nesachim? Specifically of wine, that. What's the difference between the two, and how do they complement and complete one another? So we're continuing on line 18. Ve'ha'inyan hu, and the Rebbe explains. And he's going to answer all of these questions. He's going to explain what a korban is, he's going to explain what a nesach is, and he's going to explain the interface between them, the differences, the similarity, and the fusion. Al-pi ma'ashikot of the pasuk says, V'yayin samach lavav v'gemer, that wine makes the person's heart happy. V'yayin samach lavav enish. Now, of course, on a simple level, wine makes a person's heart happy, goes on a person. But you also have the idea of the Eibush that is called Leiv. Libi of Sori. And it's explained in Chassidus that Leiv goes on Malchus of Atzilus. That Yayin, wine, not only gladdens the heart of a human being, and Kvayachol gladdens the heart of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. You have it in Gersa Kedesh and Siman Yud Aleph as well, that the heart goes on the Eibush. Then there's another pasuk, Hechedalti es Tereishem esamayach alakim v'gemer. I have that pasuk is a pasuk in Parshas Shoftim. It's a whole story. The word Hechedalti is irrelevant at the moment. The key is Tereishem esamayach alakim v'anoshim. Tiresh goes on wine, which brings joy to alakim v'anoshim, to God and to man. What is the idea mystically that wine brings joy to a person? And he explains. Joy means to reveal what's concealed. And of course, this is achieved through wine. Wine has this effect. Right? You all know the expression, Nichnes yayin, yotza seid. Yayin is 70, and seid is 70. You bring in yayin, out comes seid. It reveals. Or in the day of one's wedding and the joy of one's heart, the hidden and the secret, which is deep within one's heart, emerges from a hidden state to a revealed state. This is what wine accomplishes. It intoxicates, it makes a person very happy. And he mentions happy events, happy circumstances have a similar effect on a person. They bring joy to a person. And the question is, what is the meaning and the significance of revealing what is hidden? What is the meaning that yayin misamech elakim banosh? So he begins to explain on line 21. Kihine, b'chol davar ibtze b'metzias, everything that exists, yesh bechinas pnimius or bechinas chitzenius. There is the inner dimension and there is the outer dimension. I like to call it the face and the rear. The deeper inner dimension is invisible, and the shallower outer dimension is exposed and is revealed. And the idea is that in the reality of the world, you see chitzenius. This is a chitzenius world. It's a superficial world. It's an external world. And what you see is the extremities, the outside of everything. But everything that you see on the outside in an external world has an interior on an internal level, on a deeper level. And he explains, what's the difference between the internal and the external? And why is it that naturally you only see what's superficial and what's on the outside, and what's deep remains hidden? So he explains, because the deeper inner dimension of everything is where whatever phenomena you're addressing is redrawing from its source of life, and the way it remains cleaving, attached to its source. Everything in this world takes from something else. Every body in this world takes from somebody else. The pnimius of everything is the state of being a makabel, of receiving from another. And the outer dimension is bechinas hashpah, there's loss of the way it affects another. So the pnimius represents the dimension of each thing that's busy receiving from its source, and the chitzonius represents the dimension of each thing which is busy giving to something other. And to use the Maamar Chazal, which is a halach, of course, in Gemara and Shulchan Aruch, Aidi de torad lemivla leipolit, Aidi de torad lemiflat leibola. You can either take or give. You can't do both. The pnimius is in a state of receiving, and because Aidi de torad lemivla is busy taking from what's higher, leipolit, it doesn't give out. And the chitzonius is busy giving, and Aidi de torad lemiflat, since it's busy giving, leibola, it doesn't take in. So there's a higher level and a lower level. The pnimius you don't see, not because the pnimius is unimportant or the pnimius is dormant, but because the pnimius is preoccupied with pnimius. And in a chitzonius world, you're not going to see pnimius. The chitzonius is preoccupied with chitzonius, and of course in a chitzonius world, that's what you're going to see. And practically, the pnimius aspect of everything is busy taking, and the chitzonius aspect of everything is busy giving. As a rule, people are either takers or givers. In other words, throughout our lives, we all take and we all give. But in some stages of our lives, we're busy taking, when we're children, when we're students. At other periods of our lives, we're busy giving, when we're teachers, when we're parents, when we're adults. And throughout our lives, no matter what stage we're in, there are aspects of our lives where I'm mashpia, there are aspects of our life where I'm makabel. In other words, the biggest adult is also taking, the youngest child is also giving. But you can only do one or the other. It's either I'm busy taking or I'm busy giving. I remember years and years ago we had a need to see doctors. And we met a doctor who was a fellow. She was doing a fellowship. She was learning from another doctor to become a specialist. And we met her twice. We met her as a fellow of a greater doctor, and then we met her in another facility, another institution where she had become the doctor. Her demeanor was totally different. She was a different person. As a fellow, she was a student. And she didn't only act towards the teacher as a student, she acted towards us as a student. And then later when we met her someplace else, where she was the Ganze Metzias, where she was the doctor, she was a totally different human being. I remember being surprised that it was the same person, but when they were in the role of doctor, they had a very, very different sense of self and different relationship with us. That's what Pnimius and Chetanius means. When you're busy receiving, you're not busy with yourself. When you're busy giving, you are busy with yourself. So the Rebbe says, in everything there's Pnimius and Chetanius. Every single physical blade of grass lives because there's a mazel which beats down on it and nourishes it and sustains it. And the Rebbe is going to explain that life that comes from heaven to earth to sustain reality gives life on two levels. There is the life of the neshama and there's the life of the guf. When you look at a blade of grass, when you look at an animal, when you look at a human being, you look at a malach, argues the Rebbe, there is the neshama of the grass, the neshama of the animal, there's the neshama of the person, the neshama of the malach. That's the pnimius. And that pnimius is busy receiving from its source. Then there's the guf of the grass and the guf of the animal, the guf of the person, lahavlan, the guf of the malach. And that's what you see. And the life that's reaching the grass, the animal, the person, and the malach extends to the pnimius as well as to the chitzenius, to the neshama as well as to the guf. But what you see is guf, but you don't see neshama. For any fruit or any grass or any grain, there's two levels of taste for the fruit. And even though the Rebbe uses the word tam, he means life. Ruchni, the first. I'm sorry, let me read that again. There's two aspects. Tam apri, the taste of the fruit, ruchni, which is the spiritual aspect of the fruit. Mamoshas apri, and the actual substance of the fruit, which is its physicality. Line 26. You see, this is where I meant to say it. Here he says the word tam, but he really means chayes. The flavor of this fruit, or the life of this fruit, has two levels. The first is keach lakabel shifei min keich ve'morim, the strength to receive a flow of life from the heavenly stars. Sheheim amatzmichim, which are the source of making things sprout. As the pasuk says, mimeged tfu is shamish, the sweetness, the pleasantness of grain comes from the sun. Umimeged geresh, the pleasantness of various different melons. Yerachim comes from the moon. V'chein kol keicha prati, every individual star. Matzmiach eiseh prati, sprouts and gives life to an individual grass. This is, of course, the way it is al pi Teda. According to Teda, the reason there are trillions and trillions and trillions of stars and constellations and so on and so forth, because they're lahoyer al haaretz. The entire universe is giving life to this earth. Now, it may seem excessive that this tiny little planet with millions and billions of blades of grass require a universe which is as voluminous and as massive and as dense as the one we have, so that each individual blade of grass should be getting chayes from a cluster of stars whose malach is radiating life to that individual blade of grass. But this is how it is al pi Torah. And the justice of this we'll discuss at a different time. So there's so much life coming from heaven to earth to sustain the various different living things you see on this earth. And the second, the other kind of life is the life that flows to sustain the after physical matter of the fruit and of the grass and of the animal and of the person and of the malach. So there's the neshama of the grass, which has to do with ruchnius, and there's the guf of the grass, which is what you can touch physically. Both of them get life. And the neshama of the grass's life is on a higher level, and the life of the guf is on a lower level, and they're called pnimius and chitzenius. And the Alter Rebbe says, just like it's true of grass, as it's getting life from a malach, it's true of the malach, as the malach is getting life from its source. And there's two levels of life, the life of the neshama, the life of the guf. Now, if I wanted to create trouble, we could discuss The idea that there's a difference between how people were created and animals and plants were created. People were created, the neshama separate and the guf separate. Everything else was created, the neshama and the guf together. And this idea that a grass has the life of its soul and the life of its body as two separate things makes sense, because it's actually the same life that's giving the neshama of the grass, and it's the same life that's giving the guf of the grass. But this is pnimius and this is chitzenius. But the Alter Rebbe is going to compare it to people. And this is a bisel tzarech, and I didn't think that much about the question. I certainly don't have an answer. And on line 30, the Alter Rebbe says, "V'chein b'bchinas hachai." The same is true in animals. That chayusa, the life of an animal, also consists of two things. Number one, shu b'chinas pnimius v'ruchnius, the inner spiritual dimension of an animal. Hu davek bi'ilase is the way the animal, as it exists as a physical being, is connected to its spiritual life force. Shu b'chinas pnei aryeh, pnei sheir, sheb merkava, the face of the lion, the face of the ox, which are in the divine chariot. U'keneda, as it's known, shepnei aryeh hu moker nefesh achayis, the face of the lion is the source of the life of all animals. Upnei sheir u'makei nefesh habehemis, the face of the ox, the source of the life of all domestic animals. V'cholu. And in addition, there's v'hachayes shemachayes guf u'bsar habehema. There's a life that sustains the body and flesh of the animal who bechinas chitzenius. And then he goes on to say v'alderas bechinas nefesh ha'adam. The same is true in people. There's two aspects to this nefesh. Sheidish pnimius hanefesh, the root and inner dimension of the soul of a person, is davek bi'ilase, is attached to its cause. That's bechinas pnei yadam, the face of man, which is in the merkava, lekabel chayus, to get life. And in addition, there's v'chitzenius hanefesh, the outer dimension of the neshama, hu hashpa shemachayes aguf. It's the flow that sustains the body. And the Rebbe goes on to say on line 36, v'chein b'malach. Angels also have a pnimius and a chitzenius. Ksiv the pasuk says the makabel and dein min dein, that malachim get life from one another. Shakeach sheyesh b'malach leima kodesh. The power of a malach to say kodesh or makabel malmaila is part of what is received from above. That's its pnimius. Because no matter what level of angel you're dealing with, there's a level above. Kamei ki gaveya me'al gaveya, there's higher above higher. Shema, that's indirect, surrounding. Or gaveya maleim, which is even higher than them. And in addition, v'neisnim gamken eshur zeh la zeh, they give permission to one another. And the idea of giving permission to one another is not the way the malachim are receiving, but shubechinas hashpa'aseh l'malach achar zulas, but rather to give to the lower level of malach, hamakabel shifei mimenu, which is getting its flow from it. So, the idea that a malach is receiving from higher is the pnimius of the malach. And the idea that the malach is giving life to a lower is the chitzenius of a malach. And the Alter Rebbe concludes, this is a rule in everything that the Eibishter created, in as much as you're dealing with a chain reaction of worlds, that there's in every situation a face and a rear, a panim and a primus and a chitzenius. The event of a cause creating an effect is from the chitzenius shabbali. The outer level, the shell, the peel of the one that's above is the basis for what's going to be below. Because the inner level, the fruit, the kernel which is inside is busy receiving. Id the torad lemivla. And so long as you're busy receiving, lepolit you can't give out. And the chitzeni is id the torad lemifla, since it's giving out, lebola, it's not bottled in the same way. Line 45, hare, thus, shebechol nimtzai mesh bechinas pnimius. Everything that exists has an inner dimension or a face. Shumiloshen ponim, which has the same translation of the word face, sheperushe loshen peina. That the word face, which usually means representing something higher, means that it's turning. Turning to what? To its source. Kipon u'elai. You're turning towards HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Al teifen v'chulu. Shubechinas kol ila. This is an allusion to every cause. Shepeine v'davak be'ila say. That instead of the cause descending to create an effect, it's linking itself to its earlier cause. So pnimius means the dimension of everything, that its direction is up, and because its direction is up, its direction is not down. The chitzenius is the flow of its life to the lower world. Pnimius and chitzenius. Says that there's actually an intermediate step. Shubachinas atzmith shemachab bezakechas. And now that joins together the pnimius and chitonius. In other words, if the pnimius means going up and the chitonius means coming down, there should be no meeting. And if there's no meeting, how is this a pnimius and this is a chitonius of the same thing? And the answer is there's something in between that joins them together. And he says, "V'gimel kechesel." These three aspects of pnimius and chitonius and the memutza is Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. Avraham bechinas chesed. Umayim sheyerdim al maylo bechinas kech hashpa. Avraham Avinu represents chitonius. Why does Avraham represent chitonius? Because Avraham is chesed, and chesed is like water which gives. And of course, the way this is in Chassidus, Avraham Avinu was the first of the Yavis, and as such, he gave unconditionally. Right, like it says in the Medrash, he would feed people, and by feeding people, he would get them to bless HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And the Rebbe has a sikh in the Likutei Torah. If you give somebody food and you ask them to bless HaKadosh Baruch Hu, they're not blessing HaKadosh Baruch Hu, they're just saving money on the food. And the Rebbe explains that in the first generation, that's considered teaching people about HaKadosh Baruch Hu. The Rebbe has a pshat about, just like by Yidden, there's a concept of the true desire of a Yid is to do what HaKadosh Baruch Hu wants. In a different way, you have the same idea of by a goy. But Avraham gives unconditional. Yitzchak, which is the aspect of fire, is the notion of ascent, which means pnimius, going away from this world. And he's the central bolt that bores through and joins together both things together. And because Yaakov joins together Avraham and Yitzchak, if you will, this is a pnimius for this chitzonius, and this is a chitzonius for this pnimius. The body and the soul, the inner and the outer, are connected because the midas hateferes. And of course, this idea that the Rebbe is sharing here is true in any real human being. Real people have depth, and the depth of a real human being is very personal and private. If you observe people who have wisdom, not only intelligence, but wisdom, have depth, you will find that the wiser they are, the less they have to say. The older they become, the less they have to say, because they become more busy ascending, joining with something above themselves, and less in a position to share with others. It's just one of those strange things. Tiferet mentions that in Shvayger, the deeper a person, the more silent they are. Of course, the purpose is to overcome the silence and to speak, because this is the Eibishter's purpose. But this is the human nature of deeper people, that they keep quiet. Now, what does this whole piece on pnimius and chitzonius have to do with wine? It's very, very simple. This is the notion of a person drinking wine and bringing him joy. And he explains, Pirur shahayayin hu me'ered giloi pnimius hanefesh. When one drinks wine, they express, they expose, they reveal, they bring forward what is normally hidden. Minahelam lagilif, from a hidden state to a revealed state. V'hainu, that lafi, just like physically, hayayin toman v'nelam ba'novav, the way the Eibishter made grapes, the wine is hidden and concealed within the grapes. And of course, this is not a class on Niglen and Lomdus. There's two opinions, whether you say the wine is a part of the grape, and when you squeeze it, you're taking it out of the grape. Or mifkat pkidi, the wine is within the grape, separate from the grape, but if they happen to be together, when you squeeze them, you're separating the wine from the grape. But before you squeeze the grape and extract the wine, you don't see it. V'yetzim and a helam, it's brought forward from a hidden state to a revealed state. Al kein tive, therefore its metaphysical nature is lageir gili helam. Whereas, since physically grapes and the wine which was within the grapes is something hidden that has to be extracted, the characteristic of the wine which you extract has a similar effect on people, that when you prepare the wine in a way that it develops an alcoholic content, it creates joy, it reveals what's hidden within the person, to reveal what's hidden. And of course the same is true in olives. Olives have oil, and you have to extract the oil from the olives, and they also have a similar idea, as we'll see later on in the Maimon. When you drink wine, your face turns red, and the significance of this coloration is your face is your pnimius, and the red countenance shows that what's inside is emerging. Because the soul of life is in the blood. And the wine arouses galas pnimius adam. Of course, if a person had no blood, they wouldn't live. But the reddening of the face shows on a concentration of this blood, the pnimius. Umemele mizgale gamkein pnimius hanefesh hachayunos, reveals the inner dimension of the soul of life. Hamalobeshes bepnimius dam, which was until then hidden within the blood. And of course, he says, Acham sheisa yesem edai, if you dream too much, you fall asleep. Gebet alav ashina, you fall asleep. Now, of course, biologically, you fall asleep because you're drunk. Spiritually, you fall asleep because if you reveal too much, the body can't receive so much revelation, so it shuts it down. In other words, sleeping after drinking is not because you drank irresponsibly, but because it's too much pnimius, and it shuts down the chitzenius completely. So the Rebbe is saying this. Most people, most of the time, present a certain face. The face they present is their chitzenius. What does that mean? It's their superficial selves. The face that most people present most of the time is what they're comfortable presenting, what is easy for them to present. But it's their shallowness, it's not their depth. The depth of a person is by definition hidden. And it's supposed to be that way. That's the nature of depth, that it's deep. Wine changes that, it brings it forward. What does this have to do with karbanes and the Beis Hamikdash and so on? So of course next week we're going to explore what a karban is. And after we explore what a karban is, we're going to revisit again what nesach is, pouring wine in his be'ech is. And the point is that the karban and the nesach are all about life, bringing life down or up as it were. And the concept of wine is that what is hidden should be revealed. The concept of wine is that what's hidden in a person should be revealed in a person. And the concept of wine is what's hidden, what's hidden, so to speak, in the relationship between godliness and the world should also be revealed, as you'll see in Mitzvah Hashem next week.